Good afternoon. I almost said good morning. Thanks for being here. I would like to call to order this special session of the Yuma Union High School District Number 70 Governing Board. If you would all please stand with me and say the Pledge of Allegiance, especially as we just observed Veterans Day. I wanted to say thank you to our vets for supporting our right to stand to say this pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item number 2, the trust model policies. Tim, first read.
Yeah, thank you. We're here for another study session, so I do appreciate everyone's time. This is, I believe, our third study session regarding trust policies, and we have another one next month. So if you feel disappointed and you want more after today, in a month from now, there'll be another study session. Just know that as we go through these policies, we may bring a few back next semester, not in a study session, but maybe more as a first read, because there are some slight changes as we're going through them that we notice that we have to go back and make some corrections or add some additions for things that the board has already passed for July 1st, 2025. So just know there might be some of these that are coming back next semester as well. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jankowski and Mr. Bosch to cover the policies today. And I do have the principals here, so if we do have some questions, Mr. Semler, Mr. Lambert are here as well. There are some questions. If you have questions regarding how things are handled on the campus level, potentially even from staff, they'll be able to help you out. So feel free to utilize them as well.
Okay, what you guys have in front of you, we're not displaying it, but you each have a black folder with a slide deck inside of it. That's primarily what we're going to be referencing today. Chapter 5 is all about students. So it's an animal of a chapter. So we've just kind of pulled out some of the, I wouldn't say the bigger rocks, but some of the things that are in there that not only we've either seen changes on, sorry if you can't hear, that you've either seen changes on or questions that sometimes get brought up. Just as a reminder, the policies go into effect on July 1 of 2025. They're in addition to state and federal laws. Sometimes things are copyrighted that we transfer over, or if they're not copyright, we put into the trust. So like Mr. Brienza said, it's a work in progress, especially with this chapter. There might be some questions that make us go back and look at it again.
So I apologize. I just was hoping for an explanation of exactly who is the trust. I know it's not just one law firm.
I'll let Diane talk about who the trust is. I can tell you with the policies, the trust has worked with 3 or 4 different law firms across the state of Arizona to have them write the policies, and they're all based upon Arizona revised statutes. So if they seem similar in language at times to our ASBA policies, it's because it's straight from state statute. But Diane, do you want to talk about maybe who the trust is, like the trust retention group?
Trust is actually the Arizona School Risk Retention Trust. And so what it is like our consortium, very similar to what we have with our consortium with District 1, only on a much, much larger scale for the state. They, a bunch of school districts have pulled together, almost probably every school district in the state have pulled together, and that's how we do our insurance, for example. So our liability insurance, they do have an option for health insurance that we don't participate in. They do workers' comp. They have now just gone on and taken on the policies, so that's a new area for them. But the lawyer part of it, or the legal side of that, mostly comes from the insurance background. And that's why they outsource to other attorneys throughout the state that most school districts use as well. And but they do have in-house as well, but that's where the legal side of that comes from.
Thank you.
And just, Danny was really good, and she was able to download the hard copy also onto the iPad. So if you need to make it larger, you can actually look on your iPad as well. There's an item on there.
Okay, does anyone need a second to pull that up? You good? Okay, we're on the second slide, if you're following along on either of them. That just references Chapter 5. There's really 4 different chapters within there which address the policies. Just keep in mind that the trust uses numbers, whereas ASBA uses letters. So we're looking at 5-100, which is student enrollment and attendance, 5-200, curriculum and instruction, 300, student rights and responsibilities, which today we're going to spend a lot of time in that area. And then we have student health, safety, and welfare, which is 5-400. I put the parent-student handbook link in there. Well, on the hard copy, you can't obviously click on the link, but I wanted to point out that our student-parent handbook really references a good majority of what is in Chapter 5 specific to students. Synergy, dual concurrent enrollment, clubs, athletics, IEPs, 504s, McKinney-Vento, you name it. It's all encompassing. So if you want to go to the next slide. All right, Mr. Jankowski.
Sure. So the first one, it's not something brand new. It is something new that we started this year. And so what we were seeing was, I guess, a concentration of foreign exchange students in 1 or 2 particular schools. And so this past year, we created a procedure to limit 3 foreign exchange students per campus. And so that is just, we're going to be carrying that over from ASBA to the trust. And this is just to create a more comprehensive experience for foreign exchange students at the different campuses, and also to help with open enrollment and campuses that are filling up, because we were seeing some being concentrated in campuses that were already over capacity.
So how do we handle transportation for those students that can't go to their home school because the number's already been reached?
If you live in attendance boundary and you get to go to that school, even if the capacity, that's why, for example, Healy Ridge, and I'm sure Principal Hoover would attest to this, is a couple students over capacity, couple hundred, maybe a little bit more, because of the population in that area. So even though they're over capacity, students could still attend there. Same thing with San Luis as well. The one thing to keep in mind with these, ASBA has policies, regulations, exhibits. Trust has policies, procedures, and forms. So when we talk about procedures, it's the same as the regulations in ASBA. So when Mr. Jankowski talks about procedures, it's not about how we do it's about how we do business, but it's also just their terminology as well.
Thank you.
So any questions on foreign exchange students? All right, so if we look at the next one, this is just our open enrollment. It does list the capacities for each school. We do practice essentially preference for open enrollment, such as foster care students, McKinney-Vento. The new one for this year is the U.S. Armed Forces. We've always practiced active duty, but now includes those that were killed in the line of action as well for open enrollment. Employees, returning students, and siblings all have enrollment preference. So even if the school is at capacity, we will still allow for open enrollment for those particular groups.
And we will update this on the website after the March meeting.
Yes, yep, correct. I believe it was just updated recently, but it does get updated,
For the following year.
Yeah, every 3 months,
Right.
right along there. Open enrollment for next year will begin January 1st.
Mhm.
Go to the next page, talking about student clubs and activities. Again, nothing new here, just kind of informing of just what student clubs and activities are. They are 100% student-led. They are 100% student-initiated. They occur during non-instructional time, so usually after school. And they do have a faculty advisor. So usually you see in the board minutes, the budget and stuff, the student clubs and activities. Again, that's all student-led, student-initiated. So, they are raising funds, and they're also spending their funds and money. And sometimes that budget gets increased because there was a recent FFA or barbecue or something. But, then they'll be working on, spending that off as the year goes on. Any questions on student clubs or activities?
Okay, next slide. Just a couple of slides here on graduation. As you're already aware, students are required to graduate with 22 credits and pass the civics exam. It used to be that students have to earn a 60% on the civics exam, but it's going to be effective with the cohort of 2026, class of 2026, they have to earn a 70%. So that's just kind of a lead into the next slide, which there was a little bit of a change here. Transfers of academic credit from foreign or non-accredited schools. So it can be a challenge sometimes when our schools get students that are coming from, whether it's in-state, out-of-state, a non-accredited school, to get their transcript and then to figure out what grades they've earned, what they haven't earned. And you'll see in there, we put some of the verbiage that's from the trust. It says the district will use other methods to evaluate the credit will be transferred when at least one of the following criteria are met. And the first sub-bullet there says the course credit is approved after examining the history of the sending school, the course title and description, and or student performance. So essentially what that means is the schools will do everything they can to figure out where the grades are coming from and how they can assess them. And if they need to give a challenge exam to that student to earn their credit, they will. If they're not able to get as much information as possible, the second sub-bullet says the student demonstrates success in the next course in a subject sequence at a district or school. And the example listed there is if I'm coming in as a sophomore and I get enrolled into sophomore English and I pass the course, I would then earn credit for the freshman course. So it's a way for them to not get completely behind. And that really takes effect for kids that are juniors, seniors, or upperclassmen, because it's hard to get them their credits in a timely manner. So that's that for graduation and transfer credits.
This does have anything to do with the homeschooling, right?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
This does not have anything to do with homeschooling?
No, does not have anything to do with homeschooling.
The only time it would deal with homeschooling is if someone was coming in and saying they're going to be a junior, and they had been homeschooled for their freshman, sophomore years, and it was not from an accredited program, then and they wanted to be with us full time and then receive a diploma from us. Then correct me if I'm wrong, Derek. That this would apply to them.
Correct.
Yeah. So it may, if they want to get their diploma from us.
Okay, I have a question. For the civics test, immigration, naturalization, can I get a copy of that?
Do we have the civics exam posted anywhere?
It's the
you could Google it.
exam that that people take to become citizens, David. So it's on like the U.S. immigration.
So it's the complete copy.
It is the exact same
Okay,
one.
got it.
So I'm understanding that in that example that you used, the freshman English came from a non-accredited program. We're going to roll them as a sophomore in sophomore English, but we're not going to make a determination on whether or not that freshman English counted until we see their marks from sophomore year?
Correct. It aligns with our shift towards mastery as
Right.
well. So we feel that if a student can show mastery their sophomore year, likely going to be able to show mastery in their freshman course. It's not perfect, but
Okay, I just wanted
Sure.
clarification.
good question.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Okay. Okay, moving on to student attire. This gets brought up, 5-302, this gets brought up once in a while, so you can see on the slide, student attire may be regulated as necessary and appropriate to maintain order and decorum within the educational system and to avoid material and substantial interference with schoolwork or discipline. Sometimes people have questions about dress code, expectation of dress. Our student parent handbook does address expectations, and we can tell you that every year a committee meets, primarily consisting Mr. Jankowski leads activities. The activities assistant principals meet to review that, and they're going to be doing that again this year, because I know our principals have had questions about expectations of dress as well. Some of the things that I did not put on the slide but are referenced in your policy, things that such as prohibited attire, conveys affiliation with a criminal street gang, exposes the wearer's midriff, undergarments, and undergarment areas, contains or conveys obscene language, symbols, or messages, promotes or depicts unlawful use of alcohol, tobacco, or drugs. At the campus level, when you see those types of things on clothing, whether it's male or female, you can trust that our administrators and our teachers, it's kind of a group effort. They try to police that the best that they can. So that is referenced again in 5-302. We're going to go on to talk about violations and class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4 violations and the consequences for those. But I wanted to preface that with this being further above in the actual policy questions.
I have a question about student attire and the handbook from this year. So for next year, it's going to say that exact verbiage that you started reading, correct?
I'm not saying that. It's possible. I know when Mr. Jankowski, and you, if you want to speak to this, you can, Rob, but when they meet with the activities APs, I think they're going to definitely address what's in policy, what needs to be in the handbook, and do we want to spell it out? Do we want to put expectations for dress, kind of like the approach was this year? So it could change. Anything to add, Rob?
Yeah, I think, again, there might be a need of clarity, I think, in the handbook because, students might be reading one thing and teachers might be, administrators might be thinking something else. So the students might say, well, it's not specifically written or said here in the handbook, so then I can wear X, Y, and Z. And our handbook says, please refer to board policy, and, they don't have access. Well, they have access, but they might not know exactly what specific board policy states. And so some of those things, that's where we're going to be working with the activities principals to see what needs to be updated and clarified in the handbook to make sure that, all students are dressing appropriately.
Right. I think that, in my opinion, if we make policy that approves that language, then it should be in our handbook so that our families can follow it. So that's my only comment. Anybody else? Okay.
The next one is just, again, a little bit more on student attire, but in specific towards graduation and tribal attire. The district does not prohibit any student who is enrolled in a federally recognized Indian tribe from wearing traditional tribal regalia or objects of cultural significance. And that is something that we have seen at our graduation ceremonies, and we let those students, show pride in where they're from and their cultural heritage.
Right, but there's other stoles that get worn and other cords, and we're not saying they can't do that.
Correct, yeah. Other stoles and other stuff that deal with academics that they might be a part of, CTE, or they might be going into armed forces. But yeah, all that other stuff is a campus decision.
So I do believe that this policy itself, there's a lot of work that goes in, and you guys know, you've been reading the policies page, and I feel that our superintendent cabinet, we're cross-eyed because we're looking at so many policies, but that's good. So as we were actually looking at this today, preparing for this afternoon, I do believe that 5-302 will probably come back next semester because we actually have to add another bullet about any cultural significance, because right now it's very streamlined per state statute for Native American, but we actually added any cultural significance a few years ago in our policy to be inclusive of all cultures. So I do believe we'll see this one coming back as a first read and a second read without a study session, but because it'll be self-explanatory.
And we're allowed to alter their policies in this manner,
yeah.
right? We can do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're moving along, I believe I'm on the right slide. 5-304, staff interviews of students and searches. So this is where we get into what some of the procedures are on campuses. And again, it's nice to have the principals here if there is a question that might be specific to some of the things that they experience at the campus level. So starting with interviews at the base level, district employees have broad authority to question students regarding prohibited or illegal activity and all matters involving the health, safety, and welfare of the students. It happens almost on a daily basis. They can probably attest to that, where there's different disciplinary issues that arise at the campus level, and they're required to talk to students. The next sentence says, parent or legal guardian will be contacted regarding the interview of their student depending on the seriousness of the offense. And the reason we pointed that out is because sometimes the question comes up, is the parent contacted every time an administrator talks to a student? And the answer is no. If the questioning or the interview is of a serious nature, then yeah, oftentimes they are contacted, but there might be an investigation ongoing, there might be witnesses that were brought up, and you'll get an assistant principal or a principal that'll bring a student in, maybe ask them a few questions, no harm, no foul, and send them back to class. So questions on interviews? Okay. Let's see. The next slide, staff interviews of students and searches. And I'm going to read this verbatim just in full transparency so I don't say something that isn't accurate. District employees may search students and their belongings and/or seize property pursuant to the law if reasonable suspicion exists to believe that prohibited objects are present, a school rule has been violated, illegal activity has occurred, or the student's parent or legal guardian consent to the search. Reasonable suspicion is a good faith belief of wrongdoing based on specific facts. Third bullet, students have no reasonable expectation of privacy in any items provided by the district, including but not limited to lockers and desks. And I will say that it says but not limited to. That could apply to the parking lot. That could apply to a student's vehicle, for example. Last one, when reasonable suspicion exists, district employees may request that a student remove the student's shoes and socks, turn out pockets, or remove outerwear that will not require the student to expose underclothing. And the next slide talks about staff interviews and prohibited searches. So the reason put this on here again is there are times where you'll have, like it says, rabbit ear your pockets. We need to see what's in your pockets, but we're very careful about that in terms of student searches. Any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you?
The trunk of a car in the parking lot of a student.
We will need permission from the parent to actually access that. So that's part of when you get a parking permit to park on campus. That's part of the form saying that you'll follow those rules. But however, if we want to search, that's private property. We would actually need to have the parent's permission in order to go into the trunk of the car, or actually the car itself. There's been cases where you may see something in a car as you're walking by, and that happens as security's patrolling the parking lot. And then sometimes that means law enforcement's involved, or we call the student in and start a conversation and contact the parent regarding what was seen visibly from the car itself. But we can't actually open the trunk of the car without their permission. And they would the parent usually would come down for that as well. So
And if the student is 18?
it's still there. It's still probably you would still need parents' permission if they own the car.
Okay.
And so essentially, there's been times, and principals, correct me if I'm wrong there, you may tell a parent, like, you need to come and drive the car off campus. We're not going to let your child drive it, and they're not allowed back on campus with that car. Maybe we had reasonable suspicion that there's something in there, but we can't search it, but we're not, and you didn't get consent to it, but we're not going to allow you to come back on campus with that car.
Mm-hmm. And then I didn't see or hear anything about backpacks specifically. Where does that fall in this?
The language isn't in here, and I don't know without looking at the policy if backpack is actually referenced. I don't believe that it is, but it's part of the possession of the student. If it's in their possession, oftentimes an administrator will ask the student, do you have anything illegal or that you shouldn't have within your backpack? And they'll say, no. Do you mind if we search it? Yeah, we search it, and the student will take everything out. You go through it. And really, it's all done for the safety and health of our students. If there's a reasonable suspicion that they might have a vape pen or a weapon or something like that, that's part of the process.
But in regards to the expectation of privacy, does their backpack fall into this category? Like, do we have the right, even if the student says no?
If the student says no, you can't get in my backpack, we're probably going to send them home for the day. Campus, principals, would you like to discuss, or any brave volunteers on what you would do if a student says, no, you can't search my backpack? Would you call the parent and say, come pick up little Timmy?
Thank you. Thank you.
I would say 99.9% of the time, if you have a student that's defiant, obviously, like Mr. King said.
I was supposed to tell the principals to come up to the podium. I forgot. This is
Oh.
Eric's way of saying Mr. Brienza up, and I do appreciate that. But no, so principals, if you do need to talk, we have the mic here for you.
What I was going to say is parents are usually cooperative. They will either come in. I've experienced searching the backpack with the parent in the room just to make sure. I mean, if a student says you can't search my backpack, oftentimes there's a reason for that.
Right.
So
Thank you. Anybody else?
okay, we have staff interviews of students and searches, prohibited searches. So district employees are not authorized to conduct a search of a student that would require the student to expose or remove the student's underclothing without the advice and consent of the district's legal counsel. So that kind of goes back to the previous slide where you're limited in what you can do in terms of a search, and it's just, it is what it is. Questions on that? Common sense, yep. Okay, 5305, we kind of get into now the student code of conduct. I'm going to read this as well because I think this is important, and this is something that our administrators often deal with students that have repetitive violations. In every circumstance where it is established that a student has violated a rule and it is found that they have previously committed or are currently committing an equally serious or more severe violation as defined by the class, the current conduct will be classified as a second violation for the purpose of punishment. When assessing a student's prior violations, their entire time enrolled in the district will be taken into account. Now, I do want to say something here. The goal of this is not to make this a negative study session, just kind of you know, it sounds kind of negative when you're talking about punishment and consequences, but these are things that we experience in our district. Essentially what that means is if I commit a class 2 violation, which we'll get to in a little bit, say a fight, and I'm suspended for 5 days, and when I return a couple days later I get into another fight, you're repeating the same violation, and that could result, it's going to be held against you to a certain extent, and that could result in, say, a long-term suspension or a lengthier short-term suspension. So wanted that to preface before we go into the next slide, which is student code of conduct. What you have here is the different levels of violations. So class 1 violations, I put on here page 145 and 146 of your policy. Students who commit a class 1 violation may be recommended for suspension for the remainder of the current semester or longer, or even for expulsion. If a student commits a second offense while enrolled in the district, this may lead to a recommendation of expulsion. Parents or guardians will be informed, and relevant law enforcement officials may also be notified. So just in full transparency, just some of the things that are currently listed in the trust, and then obviously we reviewed what was in ASBA, and this was vetted through the principals too. They spent some time looking at these to make sure the classification of each violation is indeed where we want it. So potential class 1 violations that could result in a long-term suspension would include arson, assault and aggravated assault, sexual misconduct, drugs, drug paraphernalia, alcohol, threatening an educational institution, bomb threat, extortion, weapons, simulated firearms, some of your heavy hitters, okay? Goes on to say class 2 violations on page 146 and 148. Students who commit a class 2 violation may face a suspension of 5 to 9 days. So key word in some of these is may face. It doesn't always mean that you're going to automatically get a 5-day suspension or a 9-day suspension. Every case is investigated and thoroughly thought through to determine the best course of action. In fact, it doesn't mean that you're going to even receive up to 5 days. You might receive a 1 or 2 day suspension based on the seriousness of it. So some examples of class 2 violations. You have defiance of authority. That's something that you often see as a repeat violation that's taken into consideration. Endangering the health and safety of others, fighting, harassment. Let's see here. Written or verbal abuse of a staff member, initiation and hazing, bullying and cyberbullying, unauthorized entry, vandalism, violation of school policies and rules, gang activity and association. Those are examples of class 2 violations. And then on the last slide, and then I guess we could open it up for questions on this section, you have your lower level, your class 3 violations. Students who commit these violations may be assigned to detention and or may face a suspension of 1 to 5 days unless the seriousness of the violation warrants a harsher penalty. Again, parents or guardians may be notified, and if you have repeat violations in this area, could result in a lengthier suspension or even a long-term suspension. And lastly, your class 4 violations. Students who commit a class 4 shall have a conference with an administrator and may be suspended 1 to 3 days. And then they might also get detention. So just to kind of go back, examples of class 3 violations: skipping class, leaving school grounds, tardiness, disruptive conduct. And that's where administrators have to kind of look at what's the difference between disruptive conduct and defiance of authority. I mean, they're different, don't get me wrong, and I just use those two as examples, but sometimes there's a little bit of overlap between the two. Class 3, inappropriate use of technology, insubordination, forgery, tobacco, nicotine products. And then your class 4 violations, we have your dress and appearance. So right now, just full transparency, what it says about dress, because you were asking about student attire. A student's dress or appearance shall not present health or safety problems or cause disruption of educational activities. Items of attire with words, slogans, or graphics that are obscene or that are related to drugs or alcohol shall not be worn or displayed. Footwear must be worn. So this is where they're going to have to dig in and see, what do we want to put in our student handbook, and do we want to revise this one? So
Does the student handbook get presented for approval, or is that, I can't recall, I'm sorry.
The student handbook did go to the governing board last year for approval, and it was one of the reasons why is because it's online. So we will take it again if there's any changes, which there will be changes. Obviously, there will be some changes. I think principals will say that there's some areas as we go from this online one that they wish there would have been included, or make adjustments, or enhance. So it will be going to the governing board again. I don't want to put a date. It could be May, it could be June. I'm not sure, but it will.
And then I just wanted to say thank you for putting this together. It appears to me, I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the policies that we currently have in place, which are from ASBA, but it appears to me that they're very similar. And so is there anything that anyone thinks that, hey, we don't want you to miss this part because it's glaringly different in the policies that we're talking about today?
I don't think there's anything glaringly different. I think the challenge has been, back to what Mr. Brienza said, you have your policy, your regulation, your exhibit, whereas here you have your policy, procedure, and form. And what the trust has done is condense a lot. Sometimes you look at things that are in statute. Well, if it's in statute, do we want to pull it out of statute and make it very visible within our policy or procedure? But I think what you heard today is a good gist of some of the things that we deal with students, specifically code of conduct. So
Right. I mean, it's just semantics, using different words from the different organizations. But for example, let me see. Okay, so for example, enrollment, like how our policy on when to accept a new student with enrollment, it lists a bunch of maybe 8 or 9 things that we are allowed to accept as proof of residency, right? But then I'm sure that the district does more to ensure that the person that's enrolling the student is actually the guardian. So that's just policy and procedure. Is it going to be listed that specifically so that everybody knows? I just am wondering if it would cause less work on the school level if we had everything spelled out in the handbook. I don't know.
Oh, so your question is specific to what's in the student parent handbook?
Well, just on this example, like I just want to know how we convey this information to the community at large.
I was just going to say, if you go back and you were to look at the student parent handbook, it is in pretty good detail. There is a lot of information in there. Obviously, we can't take everything from policy and throw it into a handbook. Right. That's why the policy is there. Right. This was just a little snapshot, and we took out some big rocks to share with you just to get discussion going. But yes, things in policy and or procedure will be spelled out exactly the way that we need them to be. And our next step is then to look at the exhibits and the forms that we will use to transfer over to the trust.
And the forms are being provided by the trust.
In
It's like
some-
we can utilize those.
In some cases, but I would add there's the big difference in philosophy between ASBA and the trust. ASBA is monumental, tons of pages. That's probably not a very good number, but very large compared to what the trust is. And the reason for that is ASBA includes all federal and state laws in there. The trust does not. The trust says you as a district, we as a district are supposed to abide by that. We need to know what those rules are. You'll see in the policies, they'll list them at the bottom, but they don't list it necessarily, sometimes, but not very often in the actual policy. So that's what's condensed it. So you won't see it spelled out like what you're requesting in many cases. You would have to go to state or federal law for that.
Right. I was just asking if there was anything glaringly different or anything that our stakeholders need to know that is going to change.
And the work that we've been doing in cabinet, I would tell you a lot of the work that we've done is trying to make it our policy, what we do. If we do anything different, that's what we're bringing to you or highlighting to you that would be included in what we're bringing to you. We're not trying to sneak anything past or change anything drastic to that degree. We would want to bring it here and make sure that you guys were aware of that, of course, and that we are, because and our community and kids.
Right.
So that's not, so the work that we're doing is trying to streamline it to be what we currently have. And then if there's changes needed, that's what we'll work on second semester. Beyond that, if there's something that were to change from that.
Okay. Thank
So-
you.
And I'll add, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mr. Bosch. I'm patient. Sometimes.
I feel like I'm
Have you
watching a
been-
tennis match.
Have you been waiting for a while? What I was going to say, when there are changes, just like when we make a change to the ASBA policies, once they are officially board approved, we always take them back to the appropriate department and share, whether it's with a counseling group, an academic AP group. Some of the policies are specific to with credits and articulations. We'll work with our Director of Academic Operations, Charlotte Stevenson. She'll work with the teaching and learning team, and they'll take them back to the campuses so that it's brought full circle so that everybody knows of the change. The same will take place with the trust. If there's anything that's different as we crosswalk them over, we'll do the same thing.
Trying to think about what I was going to say. What it comes down to, though, is with ASBA, over the last few years, we've made policies our own because maybe ASBA presented something one way. We made sure we were following state statute, federal laws, but we might have changed a few things to meet the needs of our communities that we serve, San Luis, Somerton, and the city of Yuma, so all those three distinct communities. So you'll see some policies that are very similar because we've made them our own over the years. And then again, the policies may seem similar because they're based on state statute and federal law. And for example, I believe the oath of office was copyrighted. As an example, ASBA, the oath of office that people take is copyrighted. Well, if you go to state statute, it's the same exact word, and you can't copyright state statute. So we're just taking that straight over. So there's some things that maybe have been copyrighted, but it's the exact same verbiage, so we may take that over because that's what we do. But as Mr. Bosch said, you'll see some the procedures, which are actually the regulations. You'll see more of those coming through next semester, and that's really like the daily operations of how we do things. And those regulations usually were not copyrighted necessarily by ASBA because it's how we do things. For example, strategies for success, their ability to level up and come back after one day more than 50% of a long-term suspension. That's going to be brought over word for word because it is not a copyright from ASBA. That's unique to Yuma Union High School District. So the things that are unique to us that we've made our own, we'll bring straight over.
I applaud the handbook committee, by the way. Whoever did it this year it's great. I just want to make sure that this information is incorporated in it because it's such a helpful tool.
So one thing that we need to keep in mind is that, and this since this is being recorded, it's a public meeting, so as a community, when you want to know more, our websites are very, very robust and healthy. So where the handbook's found, you can also find granular information about how do I register my child, what sort of ID do I need, how do I establish residency or prove my residency, and then we may ask for some clarifying questions because maybe there's a different last name than on the bill than what's on your ID. So then we may try to make the connection, are you really the parent's child? So we may the campus may ask some further questions to verify that that is really the legal guardian, but those things are on our website in so many different areas. So I do ask that, public go to our website, also to research what you may need in different areas.
Thank you. I want to say thank you for preparing this. It certainly made the 200 some odd pages that we had to read much more manageable and bite-sized. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to add? Okay. Then is there a motion to adjourn this study session? Is there a second? Thank you. Motion made by Christy, seconded by David to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next meeting is at 5:15.